This afternoon up in my kuti, I was mulling over the theme of the past few reflections and talks and readings, and at least for a period of the retreat here, the beginning of the winter retreat, a theme of the protective contemplations, the four protective contemplations, and just the theme of protection in general was coming up, mulling over. I think a lot of the things that have been already mentioned and talked about and reviewed were still coming up, and so maybe a bit of reflection on some things that have already been said, so there may be some rehashing, repetition, but anyway, it's worthy of contemplation, the theme of protection. When I was mulling these over, the three Pali terms kind of kept coming up for me that have been talked about, alluded to, of the three Pali words, appamada, hiri, and ottappa, all kind of revolving around the theme of protective qualities that the Buddha enjoins us to really contemplate and develop these qualities. Appamada, the quality of often translated as heedfulness, sometimes translated as diligence, sometimes translated, I think I've heard Luang Por say before, circumspection, which is a nice translation. Heedfulness, circumspection. And hiri as sort of like sometimes translated as shame or moral shame, and that's a very loaded English word, so conscience maybe, a little bit gentler, even though maybe not so grammatically correct, and ottappa as often translated as like, again, fear of wrongdoing, fear of wrongdoing, moral dread, which is pretty strong. But a sense of concern, so conscience and concern for hiri and ottappa. So these three qualities, heedfulness, conscience, concern, all have connotations of protectiveness, things that protect us and protect others. Appamada, heedfulness, comes up in many different places in the Buddha's teachings, and even it's like in the Mangala Sutta, there's a reference to it as one of the highest blessings is heedfulness, appamada, in all things that arise. So it's considered a very high blessing to be able to develop that and nurture that quality. The Buddha's last words involved the word appamada, heedfulness, his final departure from this world and all existence. He left us with the phrase of all compounded things, all conditions, all fabrications have the nature to decay, referring to his own body, in particular, body and khandhas. All compounded things have the nature to decay. And then his admonition to the bhikkhus, strive on with appamada, strive on with heedfulness. Continue striving towards the goal with heedfulness. Sometimes translated as with diligence, but diligence, I think, is a bit, maybe a bit weak for for that kind of admonition. Diligence is certainly an excellent quality and part of it as well, that effort to just stay with it and not flounder. But heedfulness has a much stronger connotation to it. Also, another Dhammapada phrase with appamada is the heedfulness. Heedfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. The heedful never die. The heedless are dead, as if dead already. So I always found was a very powerful verse. The heedful never die, the heedless are as if dead already. So it's a very strong state of mind that's a very protective quality. Has a sense of, mindfulness is part of it, but it's really amped up with kind of moral concern and a sense of wanting to offset any kind of complacency in our practice. It's easy to kind of get complacent in our lives, even if we've been fairly well practiced and feel comfortable with our sense of heedfulness around things like precepts and moral conduct, and even to some extent maybe comfort with meditation, all the other aspects of the path. But even then, we can sometimes get complacent if we feel fairly secure, feel fairly comfortable, life is going pretty well. Then sometimes the edge is a bit taken off of our lives and our practice, and we can become just a bit lax, kind of riding on the pleasant experiences that we have through being mindful, heedful of our moral conduct, and it's easy to kind of ride on some of the positive karma, the pleasant results from what we've created. So I think that encouragement to stay heedful not only implies be careful and preserve your precepts and not to lose ground, but to really not settle for good enough in terms of the goal of the practice, the final goal of the practice, but to realize that life can be short. This is where the protective contemplation of maranasati would be coming in. That sense of realizing that this lifetime in this body are in this mind, these faculties that we have are transient, and to make the most of it, and not to let our efforts wane through complacency. So a certain amount of appamada, heedfulness, helps keep us going with the proper reflections. Hiri and Ottappa, often called the guardians of the world, the protectors of the world. Again, that theme of protection. Lokapala, pala meaning protection, the guardian, loka the world, protector of the world, protectors of the world. And that sense of conscience, or that sense of healthy shame, in a sense, that recoiling in our hearts and our minds when we have done something that maybe is unskillful, and the feeling that we get when we have a memory of it, because that's in a sense that's what our karma is with unskillful things. The results being that because we have memories, we remember the things that were unskillful, and we can experience a sense of shame or regret over that. And that is actually a very skillful response, if not taken to an extreme of guilt, personalized guilt, but something that helps us to prevent ourselves from future actions that will cause the same kind of regret or harm to ourselves or to others. So it's a very positive state of mind, or a very positive quality, because it gives us the ability to remember and readjust. And ottappa is that sense of concern for future wrongdoing that may affect others. Sometimes those two qualities, hiri and ottappa, are talked about in relation to the quality or the attitude of respect, in that hiri, conscience, is the respect, reflects the respect that we have for ourselves, so that we are concerned about causing harm to ourselves through actions that are going to bring up unpleasant memories, unpleasant states of mind, and that will result in long-term harm for ourselves. It's respect for ourselves. And then ottappa being respect for others, so that we have a strong sense of concern not to cause any harm to other people through our actions and speech, and even our thinking. So those are qualities that we developed out of respect for ourselves and others, for the world. And of course, there's always going to be regrets, I think, from past action that come up for many of us, for most of us probably, at different times. Retreat, I think, the retreat coming up is a fertile ground for these things to come up in our mind, these memories from the past. We're fortunate to be looking towards a very open kind of retreat this time around, not as much scheduled group practice, and even more opportunities for complete solitude for a couple of weeks. Some of the monks and novices have already started their 2-week solitary retreat today. And then much of the rest of the schedule will be having open periods of practice in the morning and the afternoons. And so this is a great boon for many, and might be a bit daunting for some or many people at different times, because these different kinds of old habits and patterns are going to probably emerge. Thoughts come up from the past interactions, past actions, past conversations, relationships. All these kinds of things will more likely come up in these periods of reduced interaction, reduced stimulation, and reduced activity. It's just their nature to kind of manifest during these times when the distractions are at a minimum. So, wanting to recognize that that's going to happen, and having some tools to deal with these kinds of memories, mind states as they arise, how to deal with them, not to get lost in them. There's a sutta that I keep referring to over the years that is a very useful one. It was very useful to me, as I've mentioned numerous times, when I was in my 3rd year as a monk, and a lot of regrets and remorse and self-recrimination coming up from past actions before I became involved with this practice and as a layman, and before becoming a monk as well. And just a flood of regrets about all the unskillful things that I had done, and done and said, and finding it fairly overwhelming, and got steered towards the sutta called the Conch Trumpet Blower, which explains essentially how to deal with that. And basically, just the Buddha pointing out that if we really start to proliferate and punish ourselves verbally in our heads with the internal speech, or saying, recognizing that all these unskillful things, in the example he gives as violating any of the moral precepts, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, and rolling them over and over and over again, and blaming ourselves, and basically saying, oh, I'm going to really suffer for this. The results of this kind of action of body and speech are going to come back at me, and I'm kind of doomed. I'm doomed to the lower realms, and there's nothing I can do about it. That if you amplify those past actions and those memories coming up, if you amplify it with that kind of guilt and kind of replaying it over and over again, and emphasizing it in your minds, then for sure you will experience those results that you fear the most, and just will bring yourself either figuratively or literally into a lower realm of existence through that constant hashing and guilt and blaming. And that that's not the way to relieve ourselves from those memories. And the Buddha offered the hope that there is actually a skillful way to deal with past misdeeds or past mistakes that have caused us harm or others harm, by essentially acknowledging and saying, yeah, okay, I did do that. I did say that. I did engage with that in this way. And that wasn't good. And it did cause myself harm, caused others harm. But not taking it any further than experiencing that memory, experiencing that sense of regret. But recognizing it and saying, okay, that's something that I don't want to do ever again. I'm going to make my best effort to try a different way, try a more skillful way. And I can't undo it. I can't make it so that it never happened. I can't go back and rewrite history. But I can go forward from this moment on and do better than that. And I can have the confidence that I can do better than that. And then to further, the Buddha suggests, then you start actually making skillful states of mind manifest. And in that particular sutta, he talks about development of the 4 Brahma-viharas. Metta, loving kindness, which is again one of those protective meditations that we're going to be talking about more. Karuna, compassion. Mudita, altruistic joy, joy for the happiness or success of others. and upekkha, equanimity. And that the more we develop those, the more space we create towards holding a place for skillful action and speech to come from those kinds of states of mind. So this is the way that the Buddha says we can deal with the regret that comes up, when we have an honest experience of hiri, that kind of remorse, regret, skill, but using it in a skillful way. There was an old Tibetan teaching that I can't remember the exact words that they use, but I've kind of reformulated it for myself just as a kind of a memory for those qualities, so that when a memory of a unskillful action comes up, kind of how to deal with it in the same way that sutta expounds on, but the sort of like the 4 R's that come up. It's recognition. First one is R, recognition for the unskillful deed that was done or the unskillful thing that was said. And then regret, the healthy kind of regret of the harm that's been caused. And then a resolve, the resolve or the resolution not to keep doing it in that same way. And then the 4th one, something being more along the lines of like reconstructing or restructuring, or sometimes like remedial activity. So developing something that's of a skillful nature as a countermeasure to help develop different habits to replace the old ones. So thoughts of kindness, or thoughts of non-harming. Thoughts of moral integrity, heedfulness, mata. So those 4 R's are sort of, kind of, for me, a handy way of remembering how to deal with things that come up from the past like that. And they're skillful ways because they help us let go, so that we're not just continuing to wallow in it. That's sort of that wallowing in regret is something that's so easy to do, and rehashing the story over and over again. That the Buddha has a word for that of papancha, or even in more detail, coming up from one of the teachings, the papancha sanya sankha. So papancha translated as proliferation, but papancha sanya sankha as perceptions and notions tinged with proliferation. It points to this kind of cycle that we can get into if we wrongly attend to these kinds of memories or perceptions that come up. If we wrongly attend to them and start to think and ponder unnecessarily, or with a unskillful state of mind behind it, then they start to compound on each other and feedback on each other and create more negative perceptions and the reactions to them that just kind of snowballs into something that essentially reels out of control and kind of takes over our whole experience. We become the victim, in a sense, of this process. And that's very easy to happen in a kind of retreat space if we kind of latch on to that, if we hang on to and cling on to through wrong attention, through inappropriate attention, ayoniso manasikara, by working through the stories over and over again, with regret, remorse, guilt. So wanting to learn how to disentangle from that process and unwind that, untangle that kind of mental process from happening. Just thinking about that translation, the perceptions and notions tinged with proliferation, and it's actually tinged is pretty mild. It's more like completely overwhelmed with the proliferation, completely overtaken by it. It becomes very hard to stop that. But again, it's learning how in that process, when the memory arises, perception, the process of perception is based in memory. So things that have been put into motion through past action of body or speech or mind, that then have the result of a perception and a feeling. That feeling, in this case, a very unpleasant kind of a feeling, the perception being an unpleasant memory. But before it, we allow it to start to turn into more conceptualization and the thinking process and the proliferation process. If we can learn to catch just the vipaka, the resultant effect, at that level of perception and feeling, before some of the underlying tendencies that are there, the underlying tendencies towards aversion or confusion, delusion, before those catch on to that perception and that feeling, if we can hold the experience with mindfulness and clarity right at that level of perception and feeling. And it takes a lot of mindfulness, sati sampajanya, and clear comprehension to be able to see that as it's manifesting, as those patterns are arising, as the resultant kamma, or the resultant action from that kamma, the resultant or the result from that kamma is appearing before we jump into it. If we can hold it there and just bring either just plain good old mindfulness and patience to see the experience just as it is, as a memory, as a thought, accompanied by an unpleasant feeling. And before we jump into it and start to proliferate on it, we can hold that right there and allow ourselves to experience that result without going down the rabbit hole of proliferation. So that's a key aspect of how to deal skillfully with these things that come up from the past. Staying really, it gets back to that, just staying in the present moment without creating future unskillful, or without creating unskillful responses in the present moment that result in future proliferations. We can't control the results of the past action as it manifests. We can modulate it by being skillful in our response in the present moment and learning how to hold it. There's often a lot of conversation. A number of times in the past couple of years, I've had people ask me, they say that they feel like there's a contradiction. They've heard some teachers say when some unpleasant occurrence or thought, memory arise in the mind that starts to tend towards negativity, they've heard sometimes the advice to just don't think about it, don't attend to it, push it away, think about something else that's more positive, more skillful, that by allowing oneself to experience those negativities, that's inappropriate attention, and that one needs to immediately shift to something that's more skillful. So they hear that, and they also hear from others that we have to be present with whatever it is that arises and have kind of bare mindfulness or bare attention, bare awareness, sometimes are words that are used, to just accept whatever it is that's appearing in the present moment, and non-judgmentally allow it to be there, and just by being completely aware, non-judgmentally, then that's the way to hold it and perceive it and let it pass. So they see these as contradictory pieces of advice, and it's sort of like, well, what am I supposed to do when these experiences are coming up? Do I just hold it and be mindful and not judge it, and it's just the way it is? It's like this, and this is the way it is, or do I try and engage in a more skillful contemplation, or shift my attention to something that's more pleasant to think about, or more skillful, or ways of holding this? And I think the confusion sometimes comes just from not understanding that whole process, and where to break the negativity. In that, essentially, both of those approaches are useful and needed. That when the memory or the result is arising in the form of that perception or feeling, then we do have to be with that, and we have to hold that, and we can't deny that it's happening through repression or suppression or pushing it away. And we do need to experience the results in an honest way of that past action, that memory that's coming up. But again, as I was saying before, we don't need to jump on it and cling to it and hold it and start to proliferate on it, which is, at that point, if that's starting to happen, then we do need to realize that that's inappropriate attention, that's just moving into it too deeply and making it, compounding it. It's just furthering that fabrication, that compounding, that process of creating new sankhara, either by in thought or other ways, by acting even more strongly on it through speech or body. So again, it comes back to that being very present, being very clear, clear-minded, very heedful in the effect that it's having on in our hearts. And going back to one of my old favorite phrases of it's, you have to really feel the feeling, but drop the story. So we have to allow ourselves to experience the effects through our attentiveness, our mindfulness immersed in the body, which is where it registers and where we can really experience it in a clear way. And then hold the space right there, right in that moment, and not let ourselves indulge in mental proliferation and thinking and attending in an inappropriate way. Or if we do move into that, catching ourselves as soon as we can. A lot of the battle is just making these same mistakes over and over again, and then catching ourselves a little bit earlier the next time through repetition. Catching ourselves and shifting to something that's going to be more of an antidote. And that's what these protective contemplations are all about. They're skillful antidotes. I think we can't just, most of us anyway, can't just kind of dwell in kind of a very peaceful state of contemplative awareness. I think many of us still struggling with difficult mind states, results of past conditioning, patterns that we have. And we need to have some active antidotes periodically, like these contemplations, to act as antidotes to the strong states of mind that can come up, particularly during a retreat time. So that's part of appropriate attention, skillfully directing our mind to develop new patterns to help act as counterbalance to the old habits. So there are many of those, but the four that we've been talking about are that Buddhanicity, bringing up a sense of inspiration as a counter to kind of dissatisfaction, the Asubha practice to help counter sensual craving, the reflections on metta, goodwill, to help act as a buffer or as a way to hold aversive tendencies, hold things with a lot more space and gentleness and kindness, even those aversive states when they come up. And then also the reflection on death as an antidote to that kind of complacency. We have that. If we find ourselves prone to complacency, then remembering life is very short, and we don't want to lose the opportunity. So these are all, again, pointing towards how we can protect and nurture and be heedful in our practice. And sometimes, I was just thinking about sometimes I think, experience or think about some of the more dramatic kinds of contemplations, like the Asubha practice and contemplations of death, corpse contemplations, some of the descriptions that the Buddha gives about the downsides of sensual craving. Some of the similes that used are very graphic, and the practice, like the Asubha practice, can be seen as negative or unpleasant, or contemplations of death can be seen as negative or unpleasant. So sometimes they're avoided, particularly in teachings of meditation in the West, kind of tend to sidestep around some of those things. But they actually are very positive contemplations in my mind, in my experience, because they ring of truth and of clarity, and kind of bring up a sense of freshness, at least for me, and energy, and settledness in a way, of peace, because the mind states of craving, the mind states of complacency, or those kinds of mind states, there's sort of a certain pleasant aspect to sensuality or to complacency. But it's really a very temporary kind of state of mind, and these strong countermeasures that we can take up through some of these stronger practices are like a breath of fresh air. They're like waking up to a cool, refreshing, different way of looking at things, rather than kind of like a negative, hammer you on the head kind of a scolding kind of a practice. They're very uplifting and refreshing, and bring a sense of alertness and clarity to our lives and our practice. Because we're seeing things clearly. We're not falling under that kind of drowsy, slightly confused, gullible state of mind that kind of wants to just sink into something lightly pleasant. So even if they seem like strong words or strong practices, as we talk about them more in the upcoming weeks, to really reflect on their positive qualities of waking us up to the truth. And I think that's what we're all seeking here, is we're tired of living a life of confusion. We're tired of living a life of being on automatic pilot, just following the whims of greed, hatred, and confusion, delusion. And we're looking for something to help steer us and guide us and wake us up. And that's what heedfulness, I think, is all about. Appamada is that kind of, just that willingness and that wish to wake up, to not be satisfied with that kind of automatic, fuzzy state of existence. I think we've all had enough of that. We recognize that it's a dead end. As pleasant as we can try and make it, it is not the end of suffering. So with a lot of heedfulness, a lot of conscience, a lot of concern for getting lost, we pick up these kinds of protective practices to steer us in the right direction and give us that opportunity to develop a long-term sense of ease of mind and peace of mind. So the next 3 months, we're just right at the beginning of this period of retreat. We have the opportunity to develop these protective meditations and use them as a foundation and as a basis for furthering our practice. So I think I'll leave it there for reflection this evening.